AI, artificial intelligence. Until recently, it's been a sci-fi concept. In 1949, Alan Turing over in Manchester developed the Turing test, a way of finding out whether a computer could be intelligent, like a human. It was a futuristic idea. But the future, all of a sudden, is now, and we're living in it.
AI has a big impact on my day-to-day life. So I've had type 1 diabetes now for 28 years. But since November, I've been on an AI-driven predictive model connected to an insulin pump that is essentially keeping me alive.
Artificial intelligence is already being used in the systems all around us, without us even knowing it. And, it might surprise you to hear, it has been being used for decades already. But now, with tools like ChatGPT or DeepSeek, artificial intelligence is going mainstream. It will change how we work, how we live, and Liverpool could, once again, lead the way, just as it did during the Industrial Revolution.
If you go back in our history, the River Mersey, and therefore the Liverpool City region, was at the very forefront of the first Industrial Revolution.
That's Steve Rotherham, Metro Mayor of the Liverpool City region.
We believe that we can be at the very forefront of the AI revolution, and that's why we're building the same way that we did all the years ago with docks and canals and railways, and we're building digital superhighways and all the connectivity that's needed to ensure that we're right at the vanguard of what happens in this country.
But any new technology brings fears. How will it affect how we live and work?
I've committed in our area through my manifesto to use AI for good. We know it's going to be tens of thousands of jobs, and that's what we want in the Liverpool City region, a big chunk of those tens of thousands of jobs. And if we build out what we've already got, then I believe that we'll be at the very forefront of technology.
I'm Stephen McGann. I'm an actor and a science communicator. I'm from Liverpool, and I just love the place. Liverpool means so many different things to me now. Well, especially as work has kept me exiled down south for so many years. Distance and time as a way of distilling the memory of the past, helping me to clarify the essence of the place I still call home. But Liverpool was also the place where the future first began to take shape for me. Learning my first programming language on the tiny computer my dad had saved up to buy for me. Working away for hours in that little terraced house in Kensington, filled with the sense that these new machines could, one day, if used properly, enhance the lives and the chances of the people around me. I still believe that. Despite all the problems and fears that new technology can bring, these tools can be used for our benefit, but it's up to us to decide what kind of future we want. And so, this is AI and Us, the future in our hands. In this podcast, we're going to look at how AI is already being used and developed in areas that impact us on a daily basis: healthcare, social care, housing, mental health, civic engagement, and even sport and culture. And we'll talk to real people who live or work in Liverpool, who are already being impacted by AI in their daily lives, or who could really use some AI-driven technologies to make their lives better. We'll hear about what AI really is, how it promises to benefit our lives, and the real concerns that we need to consider. Here's the thing. AI needs data to learn from. Data, information about us that we create with everything we do, whether online or even just going to the GP or using a bus. And that data comes from us. It's ours.
So currently we see companies taking a very extractive attitude towards data. They see it as something that they collect and own and in which we barely participate. But I think we do have the opportunity to take more control over our data and how those data are used for our own lives.
That's Gary Leeming, director of the Civic Data Cooperative in Liverpool, where researchers are working on how we can make AI work for our benefit.
The Civic Data Cooperative is a project funded by the Combined Authority for the Liverpool City region and the Metropolitan Mayor to look at innovative ways that we can use the data we collect in the sort of civic space, i.e. data collected by the NHS or by local government that we can basically make use of to improve people's lives. No matter how big or difficult or challenging it seems, with the billions of dollars and pounds that are being spent on designing it, implementing it, selling it to our companies, to the NHS, to local government and big government, it's still within our gift to decide how we want to see that used.
First off, what is AI, really? All right, we know it can generate you a picture of a kitten riding a bicycle, wearing a little hat in seconds, and even write your emails. But what actually is it?
It's basically a way of using a computer program to act as though it has human type of intelligence. We can use it to predict something or to summarize a piece of knowledge that we can gain from other data sets, to use a combination of different things from mathematics and statistics to basically act as though it were intelligent. An example, obviously, that we'd see a lot in the last couple of years is this idea of large language models, where we have a chatbot. Chatbots have been around for decades, but what we've seen with the large language models is a facility to bring together all of these different data sources and knowledge and transform it into a model, a large language model, that the chatbot can use to appear and interact with a human being in a way that feels much more natural than it ever has before.
AI is the use of computers or computing technology to create tech that thinks and understands and predicts like humans might be able to. I think a lot of people think AI is everything. Like if they see any data at all, suddenly it's AI, but a lot of it's just fancy math. Things like statistics and algorithms and regression, it's all mathematics. AI is sort of going a step beyond that. So I think the things that people are most familiar with, things like ChatGPT, are generative AI. So they're creating something, they're predicting something, they're developing something from a data algorithm and a predictive model.
That is Emily Rempel, a research fellow at the University of Liverpool with the Civic Data Cooperative. And, interestingly enough, a woman whose very survival is benefiting from AI right now.
AI has a really big impact on my day-to-day life. I've had type 1 diabetes now for 28 years. Up until last year, I was on what's called multiple daily injections, so it's really the most old-school version of insulin delivery that you can imagine. I just injected myself every single day, multiple times.
In this episode, we're looking at how AI is impacting healthcare. This is Dr. Reza Zaidi, a consultant who specializes in diabetes care.
It's a lifelong condition. It's an autoimmune condition where molecules attack your pancreas, which leads to a destruction of cells which produce insulin. And therefore, the individual runs out of insulin production and is unable to control their sugar levels. Okay,
so this is the kit that used to keep me alive. This is the kit that I've carried around with me since I was 7 years old. It's in this zippered pouch that says, "Just a girl that needs insulin," which was my little millennial humor for myself. I have 2 insulin pens, which is what I used to use to inject myself. You use a dial on the right-hand side to click up to how many units you need, and then you push it in. So I have my long-acting pen and my short-acting pen. I then have a bunch of needle tips that you add to the pen. I also have what is a blood glucose needle to prick your finger. So every morning when I woke up, I would have to prick my finger with a tiny little needle, get a drop of blood on it and use a blood glucose monitor, wait for it to show me where my blood sugar was at. And then I would have to make a mental calculation of how much insulin I would need. So if I was like at 10.5, I would have to subtract 6 by that, get to 4.5, divide that by 3, and then give myself like 1 unit. I would wake up every morning and give myself what's called a long-acting insulin. A few minutes, 10 to 15 minutes before I ate, I would have to also give myself some short-acting insulin. So I'd average like 5 to 6 different insulin injections every day. I would wake up every morning and my blood sugar would be either low or very high. And I had no way to regulate that overnight. My body has natural variations in how much glucose it absorbs.
Practically with anything in your day-to-day life, exercise, eating, stress, illness, work. So making calculations of how much insulin you require is a fundamental aspect of that person's day-to-day life. We've come a long way in type 1 diabetes and technology. And what technology essentially has done is reduce that burden, that day-to-day burden, to a significant aspect.
I'd wake up, be unable to function, could feel my brain just like shutting down. And I just felt not well all the time. So sometimes, on the drive to work, my blood glucose would drop. You got to stop the car, right? Pull over, drink some juice, or even worse, ironically, is that if my blood glucose would drop and I was on a train, there's no access to food. So I always had stuff with me to eat just in case. The main thing that sort of keeps me alive now is a 2-part system. One is a continuous blood glucose monitor that I sort of put on my skin and it stays there for 10 days. That then connects into a separate receiver or phone that connects to my tubeless insulin pump.
It's called a wearable technology, like a smartwatch or a fitness tracker.
It takes the readings from the past 3 days every time I change the pump, and it adjusts an algorithm so that it can better predict my blood glucose and give me the right amount of insulin, given those sort of natural variations in blood glucose. I've had it for about 3 months now. It's beautiful. Now when I get up in the morning, I don't have to do finger pricks. I don't have to inject myself with insulin. I just check things on the phone I have that connects to my pump once in a while, and then I just go on with my day.
Emily's story shows that AI really can be incredibly beneficial for real people. For patients who otherwise have to undergo endless, painful and really mentally taxing treatments. And in the NHS, doctors are working through the thorny questions of how exactly best to use these treatments, because they're often made by private companies. And every system is unique.
Yeah, so each system comes with its own algorithm. These algorithms are designed by the companies making them. They're very secretive about the process of making those algorithms. But once those algorithms are embedded in the technology, then we can understand those algorithms very well, because each one comes with a user manual and do's and don'ts of each one. We need to understand that data at the moment is one of the most precious commodities in the world right now. And each company is very protective of data, of their trade secrets, of how they make those algorithms. That's one of the challenges healthcare professionals have to bear in mind, that at the end of the day, the data remains with the companies. You've got very important pieces of data of individuals living with a healthcare condition in the hands of a certain company or a certain industry. And you're trusting those industries to be up to speed with the governance processes and have all the necessary security measures to ensure that the data doesn't go in the wrong hands or is not misused. I do have concerns, and I'd be disingenuous if I said that I trust the companies completely. There's always that risk. There's the risk of governance, and the risk of your data being misused is with every sector that we live with, and healthcare is no different.
As Dr. Zaidi has found, Many patients are skeptical of using these systems for other reasons too, even if they might make their lives better.
Some of the reasons why a user might not want to adopt wearable diabetes technology, and that leading into sophisticated algorithms and AI. One is trusting the system to manage a condition which your life depends on, to be honest. If that system starts malfunctioning, or if there are accuracy issues with the sensors, then it has a risk of over-delivering the insulin or under-delivering the insulin, and both have quite detrimental consequences, really. The second thing I would say is these are quite complex systems. If someone's been using traditional insulin therapy via injections and finger pricks, to give them a very sophisticated piece of equipment and expecting them to crack on with it can be quite unrealistic. The third aspect where someone might not want it, and we see this particularly in young adults, is a bit of a technology paradox. Young adults and emerging adults are very hot on social media and devices like smartphones and tablets. But when it comes to wearables, particularly wearables which are not very common, wearing a glucose sensor or an insulin pump draws attention. All of these sensors, in fact, come with alarms now for high glucose levels and low glucose levels. If you're a young person sitting in a university lecture and these alarms start going off, then that draws attention, and that can be quite disruptive. And there's research to say that it can have impact in forming new relationships, in intimacy with your partner.
And it's not just in diabetes care either. AI and AI-driven systems are being used throughout healthcare in places you might not think of. Pharmaceutical companies are using AI to develop new drugs. AI is being trialed to help reduce NHS waiting lists. There are so many ways that tracking our data and using artificial intelligence can help us. Gary Leeming himself shared an example from his own life.
From my own personal experience, a number of years ago, I used to walk to work every day. And every day I would get an indicator from my phone that showed me that I'd walked 9,000 steps. And at the time, the whole idea of walking 10,000 steps was very popular. I found it quite annoying that I wasn't making my 10,000 steps every day. Until one week, I did. And for a few days, I got the notification that said, "Congratulations, you've made 10,000 steps." And I thought it was a little bit weird, but I didn't really think anything of it. But then the next day, I ended up actually having to go to hospital. And it turned out that the reason that I'd been making the 10,000 steps was because my steps had shortened because I was tired, but I hadn't really noticed that in myself. So I'd had this early indication that there was something wrong, but I hadn't known how to act on it at that time. And I think as we develop more and more sophisticated tools that help us to track these types of information, look for those changes in our behavior as well, we can hopefully sort of build things that can really help us to seek help from our doctors or from our family or from friends.
And there is constant research in how to use AI to benefit patients even more. Dr. Lauren Walker is a professor of clinical pharmacology in Liverpool, and she is working to develop artificial intelligence to help her understand the most complex cases that come into her care.
Although medicines bring many benefits, as we age and our body changes and the physiology, so the way that our organ systems process the medicines that we take changes. And the more medicines that you take, the more potential for them to cross-interact with each other. And we know now that 16.5% of hospital admissions are caused or complicated by the medicines that people take. And because age is the single biggest risk factor for long-term conditions, the longer you live, the older you get, the more conditions you will acquire, and therefore the more medicines you will take. So your risk of what we call an adverse drug reaction, having a harmful outcome from taking a medicine or a drug interaction, increases. And trying to understand which patients are at greatest risk of this kind of medicines related harm is really important. So we could use AI techniques on the electronic health record system. So we want to deploy sophisticated algorithms to look at what has happened to those people as they've acquired conditions and medicines over time, and can you use that information to predict combinations that might put people at greater risk of being hospitalised because of an adverse drug reaction.
Being able to use NHS data to help patients, to review their medications as Dr. Walker does, is crucial. But a lot of NHS data isn't available for research. When you go to the GP, what you say is confidential. You are safe in the knowledge that the things you might talk about won't be shared with anyone. The data that the NHS can use for research is only what's called coded data. It's very limited.
It's a copy of the codes, what we call structured data. So this is every disease or medicine will have its own code. So there'll be a code for diabetes and a different code for a diabetic foot review and a different code for diabetic eye disease. And you can begin to see how you end up with thousands and thousands of codes to cover the different conditions. Similarly, for medicines, each medicine formulation will have a different code. And that's what goes into the research-ready data set, that coded information.
When Dr. Walker reviews someone's case to see if they're at risk of their various medications interacting in a negative way, she has to read through all the notes, all the stories the patient has reported over the years. It's a kind of pharmacological detective work to understand when a patient was prescribed something and why, and how the layers of medication built up over time. The keys to the mystery are in those stories. Now, AI's ability to read through those stories and summarise them all quickly is where Dr. Walker thinks we can really reap the benefits of AI in her field.
When you sit in front of your GP and you explain that you've come to see them because you're experiencing breathlessness and you've had a cough and you're coughing up mucky phlegm and you've had a fever, the GP will document all of that in the electronic health record as a story, and that is unstructured narrative. So where I might use a code for breathlessness, and that code for breathlessness will go into the research data set, in the narrative I might say things like, this individual who has heart failure and emphysema, I'm not sure what's the cause, I'm going to send them a sputum sample off, I'm going to send them for a chest x-ray. So I might detail my thought process and the uncertainty I've got that underpins the symptom that they presented with. That unstructured narrative is really rich in terms of telling us things about the historical presentation of the patient's symptoms, but it also tells you about my thought processes and my kind of differential diagnoses. At the moment, that part of the data set doesn't form the research-ready data set that we use for running these kinds of algorithms. And so I think there is great potential if we were able to utilise the entirety of the health narrative. And I think most people would agree that using that data for the benefit of human health is an imperative. You know, it's essential that we do that to help our healthcare system, to improve efficiencies, to discover new medicines, to stratify people for certain services.
So, we need to use AI to make our NHS more efficient. Many of us may need a medicines review in the next decades, and there are only so many pharmacy detectives like Dr. Lauren Walker. But what that would mean is that what you tell your GP and other healthcare professionals is no longer held in quite the same confidentiality.
There is a very legitimate and understandable privacy concern, and therefore patients and those of us who have contributed over the years to the development of that data set absolutely must be involved in any decision making about how that data is used. There have to be appropriate safeguards in how we use the data, certainly the complex underpinning unstructured narrative that is, as individuals, and we are all very likely to, barring a very few exceptions, very likely to all be patients at some point in our life, you know, that we have all contributed. So finding a safe way through that is really important. I think the only way to do it is through co-working between healthcare professionals and patients.
But how can we develop the safeguards we need to make sure that our data, our extremely sensitive NHS data, is used for our benefit.
The reassuring way forward is that as a healthcare practitioner, I speak to patients. The bit that they are very clear about is that they're happy for hospital researchers and university researchers to use that data for benefit of human health in the future. There are trusted individuals that they feel confident doing that work. And therefore, I think that's what's the critical step going forwards, is that we continue to be involved alongside patients in all of that decision making about how data, and particularly health data, is used for this kind of discovery science, that it's not going to be acceptable to patients for large chunks of health data to be sold to a health tech company to develop their applications in isolation. So I think patients, their input is essential to safeguarding what kind of data we collect and how it is used in the future. Because it's very easy to think on a surface level, oh, that's fine. It's fine to use my data. If you've never really been given the opportunity to imagine a way in which it can be used against you.
So how could our data be used against us, as Dr. Walker suggested? What are the potential risks? If you wear a smartwatch, it tracks how far you walk every day. It tracks your heart rate. This data might not seem to carry much significance, but it could reveal more about us than we think.
It's very easy to say, well, that's fine. It's not very personal, that data. It's not telling you anything that I would care about. But then when you dig deeper into that, you have to think, well, what about people who are really struggling? And we know and recognise that for the management of mental health, things like depression and anxiety, the importance of good sleep patterns and getting out in the fresh air, you might be trying to engage in those activities in order to improve your mental health whilst you're off work sick because you're suffering with depression. And what about if somebody then tries to use that data that's been collected from your Fitbit or your smartwatch, that they try to use that information about the number of steps that you walked or the amount of sleep that you're having to say, but I know you're better. You're better because I know you're active and therefore you can't be unwell and therefore you need to go back to work. Then that puts an individual who has been trying to do things to improve their mental health in a position where they may not be well enough to return to work, but the data that has been collected about them might be used against them. And there are loads of different examples where unless you are given all the ways in which it can be helpful, but also what the potentially negative consequences are, until you really understand all of that, you can't make a shared decision.
It's going to take patients and healthcare practitioners working together to create safe and trusted ways of using data and AI. And in wider society, it's a similar story. We can reap the benefits of these technologies for ourselves, but we need to ensure that our data is going to be used for us and not against us. So how do we do it? How can people make their voices heard? At the moment, it feels like large corporations simply gather the data they want from us and use it to build their profits. How do we change that? Well, the Civic Data Cooperative are working on a project this year to do exactly that.
So one of the core jobs of the Civic Data Cooperative is to increase the knowledge about data and AI, but also to increase the role the public has in having a say on the kinds of data and AI projects that happen in the region, to create better data stewardship models, to do something good with it, so to have impact with data in the region, and then to increase how many people had a say on it, to create spaces for debate and differing opinions, and then the creation of projects that aligned to those differing opinions. So this year, our big project is to develop a Liverpool City Region Data and AI Innovation Charter. And to do that, we're bringing together 60 residents to develop a set of guidelines on what beneficial and trustworthy data and AI innovation looks like to them. A Data and AI Innovation Charter puts a set of standards and guidelines that we expect people and organizations to essentially behave by in order to get the government grants they get and the access to the rich data we're linking together here. So without some kind of guidelines, without policy, The benefits from data and AI won't be realized because they'll just be used by large companies to create profit for themselves without thinking about what good and quality and beneficial uses of data and AI look like for people in the region.
It can be hard to imagine how we could take control of our data. I mean, these processes seem so vast and hidden. But Gary Leeming reminds us that people, ordinary people in Britain and elsewhere, have, in the past, made a real difference to the larger systems they lived in.
In the early 19th century, there was huge societal change driven by industrialization, which has had undeniable benefits for all of us. But at the time, many people were living in enormous poverty. They were working long hours. They had huge challenges, lack of access to healthcare. People came together and decided that they wanted the world to be different. And I believe that to them, the world of the big industrial barons and the big empires that were around at that time must have seemed just as big and impossible to defeat as the infrastructures that we see around us now. But at the same time, they did come together and they did overcome it. And I do genuinely believe that we as a society can come together and try to really change how these tools are being used to make sure that we are a part of that change together.
In the next episode, we'll be looking at how AI can impact civic engagement, how people can have a say in what happens in their local community and national government, as well as in their society. Do join me, Stephen McGann, for the next episode of AI and Us, The Future in Our Hands. AI and Us, The Future in Our Hands was written and produced by Nija Dalal-Small. The executive producer was Ailsa Rochester. AI and Us was an Audio Always production for the University of Liverpool's Civic Data Cooperative.